From this to this, this to this, and this to this, I will try to my best ability to show you my full rendering process. Okay, I get it. It may seem a bit scary trying to start your piece, and you may be even going in blind. But what helps me is to think of 3 things before I start. 1. Who do I want to draw? 2. What vibe do I want to portray with my audience? 3. How do I set my scene to correlate with that? I've been watching a lot of Italy lately, so I decided to draw Neo Italy for this piece. Since it's summer for me, I wanted to scroll on Pinterest to look for beach photos until I had a rough idea of what I wanted to do. I thought her being on a floaty would be a really cool idea, so I ended up picking these 3 photos for lighting and pose. I know some people have very specific things in mind for what they want to do, and it might be a giant pain to scroll Pinterest for hours on end looking for the perfect image. That's why sometimes I use 3D editing apps like Magic Poser. Alright, now that we know what we're gonna do, now it's time to start sketching. When I draw out my sketches, I like to think of gesture first, then anatomy second. I'm not really sure how to explain how I do my anatomy. I kind of just think of them as shapes and compare them really closely to the reference, and then compare distance to see if it's accurate. If you feel discouraged changing your art piece so many times while sketching, don't be discouraged. Art is all about making mistakes. Even with this, I feel like I changed the face like 15 times across the piece. I ended up asking for critique from my peers. I think critique is really good if you're unsure what's wrong with your piece. I'm now just finishing the sketch, so let's get into the liner. I'm very particular about my line art. I want things to be clean, crisp, and thin. Here's the brushes I use if you want to know. But if you don't use Clip Studio, sorry, you're kinda out of luck. But now that I'm thinking about it, it is just a simple line brush, so probably wouldn't be that hard to make in another program. Color flats are fairly easy. Just make sure each part is on a separate layer and not all your colors are on the same layer. If you don't do this correctly, then it'll make the next step really tricky. If I just showed you what I was doing on the speed paint, you'd probably be so confused you'd just click off the video. So, I'm gonna have a mini lesson with you where I show you step by step how to do my shading process. Here's just a simple base I drew, and I'm making sure all the flats are neat and where they need to be, because if they aren't, when you do your shading, it might end up on places that, well, you don't want it to be. You can also see me putting a gray base down, and that's because I'm an idiot and I forgot to add it earlier. I'm just organizing my layers to make sure my flats are clipped to my gray base and in a separate folder. I then make a new layer and make it a multiply layer, and I start with using sharp shadows and then eventually start using soft shadows. It's really important that you only use one color the entire time. The only way to make it lighter is using opacity. If you change the color, it will mess it up. So just use one color the whole time. If you're not sure how to shade with your light source, then just look up 3D models or references. To add darker shadows, I just use a color burn layer and airbrush, and to make highlights, I just use a overlay layer. Then I turn the shadows blue so it'll be easier for me to color them later. Click the flat that you want your base shadows to be in. Then right click, click selection from layer, then create the selection to have an even selection on your color. Then you go back to your multiply layer, click hue, saturation, and luminosity on your filters, and change the color to your liking. If you don't have this on your app, then you can just make a selection from your lasso tool. But I think every app has the hue, saturation, and brightness thing, right? There isn't really a method to my madness on how I shade with the HSL sliders. I just make it more red and a bit brighter and saturated. And then you can render how you like on top. I just shade in hair highlights and blue reflective light. And then you're done. Okay, back to the regular speed paint now. You can see I actually do 2 sets of multiply shadows, one for the ambient occlusion and one for the cast shadows. I usually don't do that, but since this had more of a heavy lighting, I decided to do it. This is just me shading more, defining things like the hair, adding more highlights everywhere, adding more reflective light. This rendering process is mostly up to your preference for this stage. You can shade it however you want. You can also look up different references of artists you like and see how they shade things and how you can incorporate that into your own art style. To improve a piece, I like to think, what would be shiny, what would be matte, and what would be textured? I didn't really texture anything for this piece, so mostly everything was shiny. Most of the highlights and reflective light you see me using is from the overlay layer. This is one of my favorite blending modes. I tend to use it a lot. You can also see me rendering in the water quite a bit. I had a bit of trouble with it, so I ended up rendering it like 3 times. Now I'm adding water droplets since she's in the water, and I'm adding more reflective sheens. And I also added Gilbert because I thought it'd be cute. This is the final look. I really do hope this helped you somewhat. I know I kinda suck at explaining. If you have any other things that you'd like me to make a tutorial about, please let me know. If you actually watched all the way through, thank you so much, and bye-bye!